Alright, so picture this. I'm in first grade, still that wide-eyed kid who's trying to figure out how school actually works. One day, the speech teacher, Mrs. H, asks me and another boy, let's call him Jake, to help with the morning announcements. You know, like actually reading out the lunch menu and the birthdays over the loudspeaker. Honestly, I was pretty excited because it made me feel important, like I was trusted or something. So we get up there and everything seems fine at first. We read off the announcements without a hitch. But then after we're done, Jake starts messing around. He's making all these silly noises into the microphone, giggling like a goofball, totally undermining what we just done. I remember getting really annoyed because I wanted to look responsible in front of everyone. So I told him, if you don't stop, I'm going to tell Mrs. H. I wasn't trying to be a tattletale, I just wanted him to quit being disruptive. Well, that backfired hard. Jake, instead of stopping, runs straight to Mrs. H and rats me out, saying I threatened him or some nonsense. I remember feeling my stomach knot up because I didn't think saying, I'm gonna tell counted as tattling. But Mrs. H didn't see it that way at all. In front of the whole class, she called me out as a tattletale. Her tone wasn't just disappointed, it was harsh and cold, and honestly it stung. And that wasn't even the worst part. After that incident, she basically froze me out during her speech sessions. I wasn't allowed to participate, and if I tried to raise my hand, she'd just ignore me like I didn't exist. It was like overnight I went from being a kid she trusted enough to do announcements with, to someone she didn't want anywhere near her class. I remember sitting there feeling completely confused and pretty hurt. I thought, why is she treating me like this? I didn't do anything wrong. But what made it worse was how public everything was. The whole class had seen me humiliated, and now I was the outcast. Honestly, I didn't know what to do, and for the first time school started to feel less fun and a lot more lonely. That's when my first grade teacher, Mrs. Simmons, noticed the change. She pulled me aside after class one day, and just kind of wrapped an arm around my shoulder. It was simple, but it felt like someone finally saw me, not just the so-called tattletale label Mrs. H tried to put on me. She said, sometimes adults don't always get it right, and sometimes it's okay to stand up for yourself in ways that matter. That moment stuck with me because while Mrs. H definitely made my school life harder, Mrs. Simmons showed me I wasn't alone and that I had allies, even if I didn't realize it yet. But honestly, that was just the start. The tension with Mrs. H wasn't going away quietly. It was only just beginning. So fast forward a few years, I'm in fourth grade now, and somehow the whole nightmare with my speech teacher wasn't over. You'd think things might have cooled off, but nope. She was still around, still watching, and honestly still out to get me. One day during lunch, she was monitoring the lunchroom like she often did. You know how lunch breaks are supposed to be this easy, laid-back time where you just eat and chat with your friends? Well, not for me. I was sitting there minding my own business when I felt her eyes on me. It wasn't just casual watching. It was this intense, almost hostile kind of stare that made me want to shrink down in my chair. Then, right out of nowhere, she started scolding me loudly about how I was eating. Something about chewing too loudly or not swallowing fast enough, or maybe some weird combination of both. Honestly, I was so taken aback that I barely knew what to say. I just remember thinking, why are you picking on me again? I hadn't done anything wrong, at least not anything that anybody else was doing. Other kids were chatting, making noise, getting out of their seats, but I was the one getting called out. I tried to ignore her, hoping she would just let it slide. But she didn't. Instead, she pulled me aside and without much explanation, wrote me up for disruptive behavior. Like what? Disruptive? Because I ate my sandwich in what she decided was an inappropriate way? Felt so unfair and ridiculous. Then, to top it off, she assigned me detention after school. At that moment, I honestly didn't know what to do. I hadn't gotten detention in my entire life. I was scared and confused, thinking, is this really happening again? I thought about just accepting it and serving my time, but then another thought hit me. This was her way of singling me out again with no real cause. It wasn't right, and I wasn't going to just let it slide this time. So here's where things took a turn. I remembered my first grade teacher, Mrs. Thompson. She was kind and fair and had looked out for me when I was little, especially during that first messy year when everything felt overwhelming. I figured if anyone could help me, it was her. Without hesitating after school, I went straight to her classroom. Mrs. Thompson listened carefully as I explained what had happened. She didn't brush it off or tell me to just deal with it. Instead, she looked genuinely concerned. Then she said something that stuck with me. She told me not to worry, that she'd talk to the principal and make sure I wasn't unfairly punished. More than that, she assured me I wasn't alone and that sometimes people who hold grudges like that, well, they don't last forever. That simple show of support gave me a sense of relief I hadn't expected. For the first time in a while, I felt like maybe I had an ally who could help me stand up against this unjust treatment. But Mrs. Thompson's words also planted a seed of anticipation in me. If someone as experienced and trusted as her was hinting that my speech teacher wouldn't be around much longer, well, that made me wonder exactly what was going to happen next. Because if this wasn't just random bad luck, then maybe, just maybe, things were about to change in a big way. And honestly, I couldn't wait to see how it would all unfold. So, after that whole lunchroom incident, yeah, the one where she really lost it in front of everyone, things at school started shifting in ways I hadn't expected. It wasn't just the kids whispering in the hallways anymore. I started noticing how the other teachers kind of pulled back, like they were distancing themselves from her. Not openly, of course. They weren't rude or spiteful. They just didn't invite her to conversations or lunch, and if she came around, you could almost see this awkward tension fill the room. It was like she was becoming invisible, but not in a good way. Honestly, it felt like the atmosphere around her thickened with every passing day. I remember hearing snippets from older students and even some of the staff talking quietly about how she'd been acting lately, snapping at kids, unfairly blaming them, and in some cases really just being downright mean for no clear reason. It was clear that this wasn't just some one-off meltdown but part of a pattern. I found out later the principal already had a file on her, a detailed one about her repeated misconduct and how it had been quietly building up over time. That file apparently wasn't a secret. Various teachers had made notes or came forward with complaints at different points, but nothing had ever really changed until now. I think what made things worse for her was that once the gossip got rolling and the teachers distanced themselves, she lost her support network. For a while, she had clung to the idea that everyone loved her or at least respected her role. But when the truth came out, when more people started sharing what they'd seen or heard, she was left pretty much standing alone. It was almost like watching a slow-motion scene in a movie where the main character realizes they've been cut off, but this was real life and it was messing with her. To be honest, I didn't think much of it at the time. I was just a kid, and mostly relieved she wasn't as harsh with me anymore. But the adults at school were definitely handling it differently. The principal got involved more directly after the lunchroom incident. I later learned that there were meetings, talks, and attempts to see if she could get help or improve her behavior. But nothing changed. Her attitude didn't shift, her treatment of students didn't improve, and the tension kept growing. Eventually it all came to a head. She was officially informed that her contract would not be renewed. Hearing that was almost surreal. I wasn't exactly celebrating or anything. It was more like a strange, confusing feeling. Part of me felt sorry for her, but another part just felt this quiet sense of justice, like things had finally been set straight. Because, honestly, no one should have to deal with the kind of treatment she was giving out, especially from someone trusted to help. What really struck me, though, was thinking about how this all started from small moments that built up, how her unfairness and bitterness spiraled into something bigger that affected so many people around her, and how my own little role in standing up for myself during the crazy lunchroom episode helped bring some of this to light. It made me realize the power of speaking up, even when it feels like you're just one kid in a big school. Looking back, it's wild to think how everything, from my first grade teacher's actions to the way the speech teacher's behavior got exposed, ended up leading to her dismissal. It's a weird mix of relief, sadness, and even a little pride knowing that, in some roundabout way, I played a part in making my school a better place. But there's still a bit left to the story, about what happened after she was gone and how things shifted around me and the others at school. You know, looking back on that whole ordeal, it's kind of wild to think about how much weight those years carried with them. At the time, I didn't fully understand what was happening, or how much it was affecting me. The speech teacher might have seemed like just an unpleasant obstacle in my school days. But really, she left a mark that went beyond the usual classroom frustrations. For a long time I wrestled with mixed feelings, confusion, resentment, and even guilt. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I realized that while I didn't cause her problems, my being there, speaking up, and leaving an impression somehow played a role in what eventually unfolded. It's strange to admit, but part of me almost felt responsible. Not in a direct way, like I went out of my way to make her life difficult, but just because the chain of events spiraled around me. And I think that taught me something important about accountability. Sometimes your actions or just your presence in a situation can have bigger consequences than you expect, even if you never meant for any harm to come of it. There's this weird balance between standing up for yourself and understanding how your actions fit into the larger picture. That balance wasn't easy for me to find, especially as a kid. Speaking of standing up for myself, I can't talk about this without mentioning my first grade teacher. She was this steady, kind presence during the whole mess. I remember her as someone who really listened, really saw me, not just as a kid who needed speech help, but as a person struggling with something more than just words. Knowing that she was in my corner, that I had someone who believed in me and stood up for me quietly behind the scenes, made all the difference. It gave me a foundation when everything else felt shaky. Her support didn't just help me survive that time. It gave me the confidence to trust my instincts and speak up when things felt unfair. Going through this, I also learned a lot about the power dynamics kids face in school. Adults hold so much authority, and sometimes that can feel like it's unshakable, especially when you're a kid with little power. But standing up, even in small ways, changes the game. It made me realize that you don't have to be loud or confrontational to make a difference. Sometimes it's just about holding your ground quietly and not letting yourself be dismissed or bullied. That, to me, is a form of courage that often gets overlooked. And perhaps the most surprising lesson of all was how much I grew from that difficult experience. Not just in terms of handling conflict or asserting myself more confidently, but in empathy, too. I began to understand that people's actions, especially adults, can be complicated. The speech teacher's behavior wasn't something I needed to excuse, but I started to see how everyone's battling their own struggles, sometimes in ways we can't immediately see. That perspective didn't erase what happened, but it softened the edges of my feelings about it. It helped me move toward closure instead of holding on to bitterness. So, reflecting on everything now, I'm grateful for the journey. It wasn't easy, and it definitely wasn't something I would have chosen to go through. But looking back, I'm proud of how I handled it and how it shaped who I am today. The whole experience taught me that standing up for yourself matters, sometimes more than you realize at the moment, and that support from even one person can change the course of your story. And honestly, it gave me a little piece of peace that I didn't know I was searching for all those years. At that moment, it hit me that real strength isn't just about fighting back. It's about understanding, growing, and moving forward. And that's the lesson I've carried with me ever since.